Imagine discovering a human species that changed our bodies, our abilities, even our survival, and yet left almost no trace in the ground. No cities, no carvings, no skeletons. Only invisible signatures hidden inside millions of people alive today. What kind of civilization disappears so completely that DNA becomes the only proof it ever existed? And if one unknown human species could shape us this deeply, how many others still wait inside our genome, unnoticed? Before 2010, human origins seemed like a puzzle with most of its edges already in place. Neanderthals in Europe, Homo sapiens in Africa, and a few archaic cousins scattered across Asia. But the moment scientists sequenced DNA from a small finger bone found in Siberia's Denisova Cave, the picture shattered. The genetic code did not match Neanderthals. It did not match modern humans. It belonged to a lineage so distant that researchers were forced to confront a shocking truth. A completely unknown kind of human had once walked across Eurasia, and they had been here for tens of thousands of years. The discovery rewrote human evolution overnight. Denisovans were not an obscure branch. Their DNA still shapes living populations across Asia, Oceania, and the Pacific. They gave Tibetans the ability to survive at deadly altitudes where oxygen is dangerously thin. They influenced immune responses in Southeast Asia. They left fragments in the genomes of Aboriginal Australians, Filipinos, Polynesians, and dozens of other groups. These were not weak or marginal people. They were powerful, adaptable, and widespread. Yet their physical identity remains a void. No full Denisovan skull has ever been found. No face has been reconstructed from bone. We know more about their genes than their bodies, an eerie reversal in archaeology. If they were truly that influential, why did they leave so little behind? Did they live in small, mobile groups? Did they build structures that vanished with time? Or did something far more dramatic erase their traces? Inside Denisova Cave, the story grows even stranger. Genetic sequencing reveals that Neanderthals, Denisovans, and early Homo sapiens all used this cave at different periods, sometimes overlapping. They didn't just coexist, they interbred. The remains of Deni, a girl with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, prove their worlds collided not in conflict, but in kinship. This single child tells us their interactions were intimate, complex, and far more human than previous models ever allowed. But Denisovan influence stretches far beyond Siberia. DNA evidence suggests multiple waves, multiple subgroups, some genetically closer to the Siberian Denisovans, others branching into entirely different lineages. Their migrations reached as far south as the Philippines and as far east as the islands of Oceania. Their genetic diversity suggests they were not a small population hiding at the edge of extinction, but a large and adaptable one spreading across continents with skill and resilience. This raises questions that challenge the foundations of human history. Could Denisovans have possessed technologies that left few archaeological marks? Could they have shaped early Homo sapiens through cultural exchange, not just interbreeding? Are ancient myths of mountain giants, forest spirits, and unusually tall strangers echoes of encounters with Denisovans long before written history? We cannot answer these questions with certainty, but the DNA points toward a past far more complex than we were taught. Denisovans were not a forgotten footnote. They were a major force in human evolution, shaping the bodies and capabilities of millions of people today. And this is only the beginning. As the story unfolds, the mystery deepens. How could a human species so influential vanish so completely that science had to rediscover them inside our genes?
When scientists first tried to determine how Denisovans fit into the human family tree, they expected a simple answer:
somewhere close to Neanderthals, perhaps a regional variant, nothing too disruptive. But the deeper they sequenced the genome, the more the picture defied expectations. Denisovans branched off from the Neanderthal line hundreds of thousands of years earlier, creating a split so deep that some researchers now argue they may represent several distinct species rather than one. The Denisovan genome is not uniform. It contains layers, hints of expansion, isolation, and re-expansion across vast distances. It looks less like the record of a fading population and more like the footprint of a people who adapted again and again to new environments. One of the clearest clues comes from the EPAS1 gene, the adaptation that allows Tibetans to thrive at extreme altitudes where most humans would collapse. This gene did not originate in Homo sapiens. Its unique structure is a perfect match to Denisovan DNA. In other words, without Denisovans, the people of the Himalayas might never have survived the roof of the world. And EPAS1 is not the only evidence. Dozens of genes linked to immunity, metabolism, oxygen regulation, and even tooth and jaw development show ancient Denisovan signatures. These traits are not random. They point toward a population that was physically robust, extremely cold-tolerant, and capable of pushing into dangerous environments long before modern humans expanded out of Africa. Across Southeast Asia and the Pacific, the story becomes even stranger. Papuans, Aboriginal Australians, and some Filipino groups carry up to 4 to 6% Denisovan DNA, an astonishingly high percentage for a lineage that is supposed to have vanished around 50,000 years ago. The distribution is inconsistent with a single interbreeding event. It suggests multiple waves of Denisovan populations, genetically distinct from one another, crossing islands, coasts, and mountains that would have demanded intelligence, planning, and navigation skills. These were not primitive wanderers. They were humans capable of long-distance movement, surviving extreme climates, and repeatedly establishing themselves in new territories. Even in China, mysterious fossils like the Xiahe mandible from Tibet reveal traits unlike Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. Its proteins match Denisovan signatures, giving us one of the first physical hints of what these ancient humans might have looked like. Large-jawed, powerful, built for harsh conditions. Yet these fragments remain frustratingly incomplete, leaving more questions than answers. How tall were they? How did they move? Did they resemble Neanderthals or look entirely different? Until a complete skeleton is found, we rely only on genetic shadows. The silence of the archaeological record is equally perplexing. If Denisovans were so widespread, where are their tools, their camps, their art, their remains? Denisova Cave alone cannot represent the full scale of their world. Some scientists believe Denisovans lived mostly in highlands, tropical forests, or regions where organic material decays rapidly. Others suspect their material culture may have been simple or built from perishable resources. But a more unsettling possibility lingers. Perhaps they did leave traces. We just haven't recognized them. If Denisovans developed regional subgroups with different tool styles, archaeologists may have misclassified their artifacts as belonging to early Homo sapiens or late archaic humans. As geneticists map more Denisovan signatures, the overlaps with human migrations grow increasingly complex. Patterns emerge that challenge old models of prehistory, interbreeding events near the Himalayas, island encounters in the Pacific, unexpected signals in mainland Asia. Each new revelation hints at a prehistoric world far more interconnected than we believe, where human species did not merely replace each other, they interacted, exchanged genes, and sometimes flourished side by side. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable idea. Early Homo sapiens were not alone, nor were they always dominant. In some regions, Denisovans may have been the stronger, better adapted, even more technologically capable group. The fact that Homo sapiens eventually replaced them does not guarantee superiority. It may simply reflect migrations, climate shifts, or chance events that obscured earlier chapters of our shared history. Yet the greatest mystery persists. How could such a successful human lineage disappear almost completely? The genetic traces show influence, expansion, resilience. The physical record shows absence, silence, disappearance. That contradiction fuels one of the biggest debates in modern anthropology. Did their populations collapse due to climate change? Did they merge fully into Homo sapiens through repeated interbreeding? Or is there still a lost record, buried in mountains, sunken coastlines, or unexplored caves, waiting to reveal the missing pieces? And as we turn to the next chapter, a larger question emerges. If Denisovan DNA reshaped our understanding of human evolution this dramatically, what other ancient lineages might still be hidden inside us, waiting to rewrite everything we think we know?
As researchers continued decoding the Denisovan genome, the ancient world they thought they understood began to unravel. What was once imagined as a landscape of separated human species, each evolving in its own corner, now appeared interconnected, full of overlapping territories, mixed populations, and unexpected genetic exchanges. Denisovan DNA did not behave like the signature of a small, isolated group. It behaved like evidence of a people who had moved widely, adapted repeatedly, and left behind genetic footprints across thousands of miles. The uneven distribution of Denisovan DNA is one of the strongest clues. In Melanesia and parts of Oceania, their genetic presence is surprisingly strong. In East Asia, it is scattered but detectable. In the Himalayas, it hides inside specialized adaptations that allow survival where oxygen is dangerously thin. This map is not random. It suggests separate Denisovan branches taking different paths, encountering early Homo sapiens at different moments, and influencing them in different ways. Instead of a single Denisovan population, the DNA points to a tapestry of related but distinct groups that diverged, spread, and sometimes re-merged over tens of thousands of years. Genetic timelines deepen this picture. They show that early Homo sapiens interbred with Denisovans more than once. These encounters took place far apart in both space and time. One wave of Denisovan contact seems to have occurred somewhere in Southeast Asia. Another event appears more aligned with Central or South Asia. A third may have happened near the highlands of Tibet. For a species that left so few physical traces, their genetic echoes reveal a long history of movement and resilience. This raises a puzzle that still haunts scientists. If Denisovans roamed such a vast area, where is their archaeological record? How can a people with such wide-ranging influence remain so invisible in the ground? Some researchers believe their artifacts have been misclassified, mixed with material from early Homo sapiens or late Neanderthals. Others propose Denisovan populations lived in regions where organic material decayed rapidly, tropical forests, high-altitude zones, or shifting coastlines now underwater. A few controversial fossils from China and Southeast Asia show features unlike any known species, sparking debates about whether some Denisovan groups may already have been discovered but not genetically confirmed. Climate patterns offer additional insight. Denisovans appear to have thrived during glacial periods when Eurasia became colder and more challenging. Their genetic influence on cold tolerance and oxygen efficiency supports this idea. While other hominin populations retreated or struggled, Denisovans may have expanded. This makes their disappearance even harder to explain. A species so well adapted to harsh environments should have survived longer, yet their traces fade sharply toward the end of the last ice age. Whether due to shifting habitats, rising temperatures, competition with Homo sapiens, or gradual absorption into expanding human groups, the exact cause remains unclear. Interactions between Denisovans and early Homo sapiens were likely more complex than simple encounters. Genetic mixing implies a level of familiarity that goes beyond fleeting contact. For this exchange to occur repeatedly across different regions, there must have been moments of cooperation, communication, and shared survival. Such possibilities reshape how we imagine prehistoric relationships. They suggest an ancient world where different humans recognized one another not as alien beings, but as neighboring peoples. Cultural memory may even preserve faint reflections of these interactions. Many Asian and Pacific mythologies describe large mountain dwellers, forest guardians, or cold-adapted beings who lived apart yet occasionally crossed paths with early humans. These stories cannot serve as evidence, but they resonate strangely with what the DNA implies. A world where multiple humankinds coexisted, and where encounters left impressions deep enough to echo across generations. Today, Denisovan DNA functions like a map of ancient contact zones. Each gene is a clue pointing toward a forgotten moment, an adaptation gained, a population merged, a migration redirected. Together, they reveal a prehistoric landscape far more dynamic than earlier models ever suggested, one shaped by repeated crossings between different groups whose histories have only begun to surface. As researchers traced Denisovan signatures across genomes from dozens of modern populations, a pattern emerged that was even more intricate than expected. The genetic markers did not simply appear and fade. Instead, they formed deep layers, the kind only possible when a lineage persists through multiple eras of migration. This suggests that Denisovans were not just present across Asia, they were present long enough to influence the genetic direction of populations that came after them. Yet the more the data grows, the more the archaeological silence becomes impossible to ignore. How could a people so impactful leave behind almost nothing we can hold? Some scientists argue that the answer lies not in Denisovan disappearance, but in our incomplete understanding of ancient Asia. Vast regions remain underexplored. The high plateaus of Central Asia, dense tropical forests of Southeast Asia, and coastal areas submerged after the last ice age. Any settlements made of wood, hide, or plant fibers would have vanished. Even stone tools can be difficult to distinguish when multiple hominin groups used similar techniques. If Denisovans had diverse branches, their technologies might also have varied, leaving no single artifact style for researchers to identify. Instead, their presence may be scattered across existing collections, misattributed to early Homo sapiens simply because we lack a skeletal framework to match them with. The discovery of the Xia-He mandible on the Tibetan Plateau illustrates this problem perfectly. For decades, it sat unrecognized, its massive jaw and unusual shape raising questions but offering no answers. Only when scientists extracted ancient proteins did its true identity emerge. It belonged not to a Neanderthal or Homo sapiens, but to the same lineage as the Denisovans of Siberia. This one bone forced anthropologists to redraw the map of ancient human presence in Asia. It meant Denisovans were not confined to one cave. They lived thousands of kilometers away, at dizzying altitudes modern humans would struggle to endure without genetic help that, ironically, came from Denisovans themselves. Such moments raise a profound question. How many Denisovan remains have we already found without knowing? Fossil identification relies heavily on comparison, but without a complete Denisovan skull, every unusual fragment becomes a puzzle. Some skulls from China with large eye sockets and robust features have been labeled archaic Homo, others assigned to early Homo sapiens. But what if the variation we see is not randomness, but evidence of multiple Denisovan subgroups adapted to different environments? Until more DNA can be extracted, these debates remain unresolved. Another mystery lies in the timing of Denisovan interactions with Homo sapiens. Genetic models show that at least 3 distinct hybridization events occurred, but the locations remain uncertain. One likely happened in Southeast Asia, where island groups today carry some of the highest Denisovan ancestry on Earth. Another may have occurred somewhere in Central Asia, affecting populations that later moved south. A third seems linked to high-altitude regions. These repeated encounters suggest a long coexistence rather than brief contact. For tens of thousands of years, Denisovans and early humans moved through the same landscapes, following rivers, herds, and climate shifts, inevitably crossing paths. The idea of coexistence leads anthropologists to re-examine ancient ecosystems. Denisovans likely had behaviors and cultural patterns similar to other human species. They probably hunted in coordinated groups, maintained seasonal shelters, crafted clothing for cold climates, and passed down knowledge within family lines. Their disappearance, therefore, cannot be explained by a single event. It must have been a gradual process shaped by environmental pressures, interbreeding, and the slow diffusion of smaller populations into larger ones. In other words, they may not have vanished. They may have blended so deeply into migrating Homo sapiens that only fragments of their genome remain. Yet even if Denisovans blended into modern populations, the scale of their earlier presence still demands explanation. A species that influenced oxygen regulation, metabolic pathways, and immune resistance must have lived in large enough numbers to leave strong genetic imprints. Were they far more widespread than current evidence shows? Or did their unique traits emerge from isolated populations that thrived in harsh conditions where other humans struggled? These questions point toward a larger truth about the ancient world. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we have lost. Entire chapters of human history lie buried under ice, sea, and sea. Denisovans are merely the first to rise from that forgotten world through the power of DNA. If a single finger bone could reveal an entire hidden lineage, what else might be waiting, unearthed, misidentified, or still locked in the deep silence of our genome? And in that silence, there may be clues not only to who the Denisovans were, but to a deeper understanding of what being human once meant. The past is far from finished with us. Sometimes it returns in whispers carried inside our own blood. As scientists compared Denisovan DNA with the genetic patterns of early Homo sapiens, they began uncovering clues that challenged long-held assumptions about how ancient humans moved, settled, and adapted. The Standard Model described human expansion out of Africa as a steady wave pushing into new territories, gradually replacing older hominin groups. But Denisovan DNA shows something very different. A world where human migrations were not one-way movements, but back-and-forth journeys shaped by climate, geography, and encounters with other species who had already mastered those landscapes. One of the most revealing insights comes from studying the paths humans took across Asia. The continent is vast and fragmented, filled with deserts, jungles, towering mountain chains, and harsh winters. For early Homo sapiens to survive, they needed more than curiosity. They needed knowledge, adaptation, and luck. Denisovans, already spread across key regions, may have shaped those early journeys in ways we can now detect only in genetic traces. Their adaptations to cold, altitude, and pathogens were not just biological curiosities. They were survival tools that early humans absorbed through interbreeding. The fact that these traits remain beneficial today hints at how crucial they were in the past. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites suggests that ancient Asia was far from empty. Stone tools unearthed across Siberia, northern China, and Central Asia point to repeated hominin presence stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. While it is impossible to assign most of these artifacts directly to Denisovans, the sheer number of sites aligned with regions showing Denisovan genetic influence strengthens the idea that they occupied these landscapes long before Homo sapiens arrived. Some tools resemble Neanderthal technologies. Others are more primitive or surprisingly advanced. This mix supports the view that Denisovans, like any widespread human population, developed diverse regional cultures shaped by local conditions. The movement of early Homo sapiens through these environments would not have been random. They followed rivers, coastlines, and valleys that offered food and safer passage. Along these routes, they likely encountered Denisovan groups who had lived there for millennia. These meetings could have been cautious, strategic, or even cooperative. Genetic mixing implies that these encounters did not always result in conflict. Instead, humans may have learned from Denisovans, observed their survival strategies, or simply shared the same spaces during periods of resource abundance. Climate shifts played a major role in shaping these interactions. During colder periods, glaciers expanded, opening land bridges and new migration paths while closing others. During warmer phases, rising seas and expanding forests forced populations to adapt or relocate. Denisovans, already proven resilient to extreme cold and high-altitude conditions, may have thrived during glacial periods when other hominins struggled. This resilience could explain why their genetic influence appears strongest in populations inhabiting harsh environments today. It may also explain why Homo sapiens entering these regions found it advantageous to integrate Denisovan traits. Some paleoclimatic models show that certain Denisovan-rich regions, such as Southeast Asia and the Tibetan Plateau, were ecological crossroads where multiple human groups passed through over tens of thousands of years. These crossroads would have amplified genetic mixing and cultural exchange. Human migration was not a single wave, but a complex dance of movement, retreat, adaptation, and return. In this sense, Denisovans were not passive characters in the story of human expansion. They were key players, shaping the outcomes of these ancient journeys. The question of navigation and travel also comes into focus. How did early humans and Denisovans cross difficult terrains? Did they have seasonal routes? Did they follow animal migrations? Some genetic evidence suggests that Denisovan groups were capable of traversing mountain passes that even modern hikers find difficult. Their oxygen-efficient physiology would have given them a clear advantage in such landscapes. If they possessed knowledge of safe routes, shelter locations, or hunting grounds, Homo sapiens entering those areas might have adopted such knowledge through close contact. Even the distribution of Denisovan DNA in island Southeast Asia raises intriguing questions. How did Denisovan genes spread across regions separated by ocean channels? Did Denisovan populations sail or raft between islands? While direct evidence is lacking, the genetic distribution suggests mobility that goes beyond simple land migration. This possibility echoes broader questions about ancient seafaring, questions that remain open across many parts of human prehistory. Taken together, these clues depict a world where Denisovans were deeply woven into the movement of early humans. They were not obstacles, but integral components of the landscapes Homo sapiens entered. They left no written records, no monumental architecture, and few identifiable remains. Yet their influence is visible in every genome that carries their adaptations. They shaped not only who survived, but where populations could thrive. As the picture of ancient migrations grew clearer, scientists began focusing on another puzzle hidden within Denisovan DNA: the possibility that some Denisovan lineages were far more genetically distinct from each other than previously believed. The Siberian Denisovan genome serves as the anchor point, but populations in island Southeast Asia show signatures that diverged so deeply they may represent entirely separate branches of the same lineage. This implies long-standing isolation between groups, perhaps separated by distance, climate barriers, or ecological niches that shaped their evolution in different directions. The idea that Denisovans were a single, uniform population becomes increasingly unlikely as more genetic evidence emerges. One region where this complexity becomes apparent is New Guinea, where certain modern groups carry Denisovan markers that differ substantially from those seen elsewhere. These markers point to an interbreeding event with a Denisovan group distinct from the Siberian lineage, one that may have lived in the tropics, developed adaptations suited to humid forests, and moved through lowland environments very different from the cold habitats associated with Denisova Cave. The genetic depth of these signals suggests interaction with a population that had been diverging for hundreds of thousands of years. This raises the possibility that Denisovans were far more geographically and ecologically adaptable than anyone anticipated. Such adaptability may also explain the enormous geographic spread of their genetic influence. It was once assumed that only Homo sapiens had the versatility to occupy diverse environments, but Denisovan expansions appear to challenge this assumption. They may have navigated mountain ranges, crossed rivers swollen by glacial melt, trekked through dense forests, and persisted in regions where climatic extremes shaped every aspect of survival. This paints a picture of a species not limited to a narrow ecological zone, but capable of thriving across drastically different landscapes. The archaeological scarcity becomes even more striking when considered alongside this genetic diversity. If Denisovans formed multiple regional branches, then their material cultures may have varied, leaving behind toolkits that do not resemble one another. Some tools may resemble those of late Homo erectus groups, others those of early Homo sapiens or Neanderthals. Without definitive skeletal features to anchor them, archaeologists cannot confidently classify these artifacts. This possibility suggests that the Denisovan archaeological record might already exist in fragments scattered across Asian collections, only lacking the genetic context needed to recognize it. Another layer of complexity arises when considering contact between Denisovans and Neanderthals. The famous hybrid individual, Denny, demonstrates that these populations did more than coexist. They formed families. The evolutionary divergence between Neanderthals and Denisovans was large, yet not large enough to prevent interbreeding. This implies that wherever their territories overlapped, they may have lived in parallel, sharing hunting grounds during certain seasons and retreating to safer zones during others. The boundary between them may not have been marked by competition, but by the rhythms of climate and resource availability. The role of climate is particularly significant. Repeated glacial cycles throughout the Pleistocene created unstable landscapes that forced migrations, extinctions, and new opportunities for expansion. Denisovans living in high-altitude or cold-adapted environments may have surged during glacial periods, taking advantage of cooler temperatures, while Homo sapiens spread more effectively during interglacial phases. These alternating conditions could have shaped contact zones, pushing populations together or pulling them apart depending on the era. Over tens of thousands of years, these cycles created countless opportunities for genetic exchange. This interplay of climate, geography, and interbreeding helps explain why Denisovan traits persist so strongly in some populations today. Traits that improved oxygen efficiency or cold tolerance became essential for survival in high-altitude regions. Immune-related genes may have spread through populations that needed protection against local pathogens. Even now, these traits continue to offer benefits, serving as reminders of the ancient people who first carried them. One striking theme that continues to emerge from Denisovan research is how much of their world remains invisible. Their migrations, their tools, their shelters, their languages, none of these have been uncovered in a definitive form. Yet their DNA reveals an expansive, dynamic presence across the ancient world. It suggests cultures that adapted intelligently to their environments, groups that negotiated both harsh climates and contact with other human species, and populations that persisted far longer than the archaeological record currently reflects. This invisibility, paradoxically, makes their story even more compelling. A people whose influence remains strong but whose traces have nearly vanished invites speculation about how much of human history still lies buried in places no one has looked, or hidden in bones that sit misidentified on museum shelves. It forces us to wonder what else has slipped through the cracks of time, whether other unknown lineages once walked beside us, leaving nothing but faint echoes in our genetic inheritance. And sometimes, it's the quietest footprints that lead to the most surprising places. As the genetic map of Denisovan influence expanded, scientists began to examine not just where these ancient humans lived, but how their remarkable adaptations evolved. Each distinctive genetic marker hinted at millennia of survival under some of the harshest conditions on Earth. Rather than viewing Denisovans as a mysterious side branch, researchers increasingly saw them as a lineage that mastered environments others struggled to endure. This perspective reshaped scientific understanding of both Denisovans and early Homo sapiens, for it implied that many of humanity's later successes were built on foundations Denisovans had already laid. One of the most revealing areas of study centered on physiological adaptations. The EPAS1 gene, which helps modern Tibetans thrive at altitudes that starve lowland populations of oxygen, offered a profound example. Its Denisovan origin showed that long before Homo sapiens even approached the Himalayan region, a Denisovan population had already adapted to thin air by evolving a more efficient response to low oxygen levels. Such an adaptation could not have arisen quickly. It required countless generations living in high, cold terrain. This meant Denisovans did not merely pass through the Tibetan plateau, they occupied it long enough for natural selection to sculpt their biology. Other Denisovan-associated genes influence how the human body processes fat, regulates heat, and fights pathogens. In regions where Denisovan ancestry is strongest, these traits remain vital. People in parts of Papua New Guinea exhibit immune-related markers that appear to come from the Denisovan group accustomed to tropical pathogens. Meanwhile, genetic variants found among Siberian and Central Asian populations hint at adaptations to extreme cold or prolonged winter scarcity. Together, these patterns reveal a species capable of flourishing across a dizzying range of climates, from equatorial forests to mountain ranges that scrape the sky. The question that followed was inevitable. How did Denisovans become so adaptable? Their success suggests a sophisticated relationship with their environment. They likely recognized seasonal rhythms, followed herds, built shelters that changed with weather, and crafted tools that suited local resources. While their tools have not been definitively identified, the regions where their genetic influence remains strongest often correspond to areas rich in stone flakes, blades, and scrapers of uncertain origin. Some bear resemblance to Neanderthal craftsmanship, while others echo earlier Asian traditions. This diversity suggests that Denisovans may have adopted or reinvented technologies depending on where they lived, further complicating efforts to track them in the archaeological record. Environmental adaptability also shaped their interactions with other human groups. When Homo sapiens expanded into Eurasia, they encountered Denisovans who had already mastered local conditions. Interbreeding gave early humans immediate advantages. Genes that might have taken thousands of years to evolve were acquired in a single generation. This gene flow acted like a genetic shortcut, allowing Homo sapiens to settle regions that would otherwise have been deadly. The importance of this inheritance is still visible today. Without Denisovan DNA, large human populations in Asia and Oceania would not possess the adaptations that allow them to thrive where they live. Another question emerged from this research. Were Denisovans innovators or inheritors? Did they develop these adaptations themselves, or did they acquire them from even older hominin groups? Some genetic models suggest Denisovans may have interbred with another archaic species before their divergence from Neanderthals, an unknown lineage that left no fossil record but contributed sequences that still appear in their genome. If true, Denisovan ancestry may hold the key to identifying yet another lost population, pushing the boundaries of the human family tree deeper into the past. This possibility highlights a recurring theme in Denisovan research. Invisibility does not mean insignificance. The genetic trail they left behind is rich, complex, and deeply embedded in modern populations, yet their physical remains are almost non-existent. This imbalance has forced scientists to rely on genetic inference rather than traditional excavation. It is an uncomfortable shift for a field long grounded in bones and artifacts, but it reflects the reality that Denisovan history is written more in living cells than in stone. With each new study, our understanding of them sharpens. Denisovans were not shadows wandering through prehistory. They were resilient, adaptable humans whose evolutionary path intersected deeply with our own. They survived freezing winds, thin air, tropical diseases, and shifting climates that drove many species to extinction. They carried knowledge of landscapes that stretched from Siberia to Oceania, and their genetic legacy still shapes how millions of people breathe, fight infections, and endure extreme environments. Yet despite all this, their faces remain unknown, their voices lost, their stories erased except for the traces hidden inside our DNA. The challenge ahead lies in piecing together a world they knew intimately, a world we are only now discovering existed at all. While scientists focused on Denisovan physiological adaptations, another line of evidence began to surface, one that suggested Denisovans may have possessed forms of culture, behavior, and cognition far more advanced than the archaeological record currently reveals. These clues emerged not from tools or carvings, but from the patterns of genetic inheritance themselves. The depth and stability of Denisovan-derived genes imply long-term social structures that supported survival in extreme environments. These patterns do not arise in disorganized populations. They require communities capable of transferring knowledge, coordinating movement, and raising generations in places where survival demanded constant problem-solving. One of the strongest hints comes from the Himalayan region. For Denisovans to evolve high-altitude adaptations, they needed to remain on the plateau over many thousands of years. Such endurance suggests a society that learned to navigate seasonal scarcity, build shelters against brutal winds, and perhaps store or process food in ways that left no detectable archaeological trace. Their success in this hostile environment may have come from a mastery of local ecology, knowing which valleys held game in the winter, where plants with medicinal properties grew, or how to traverse dangerous passes without succumbing to the thin air. All of this knowledge would have required communication, memory, and cooperation. In the southern regions where Denisovan ancestry appears strongest, particularly in islands Southeast Asia and Melanesia, their genetic influence suggests another form of adaptability. Instead of cold climates, these Denisovan groups may have lived in dense, humid forests filled with venomous animals, pathogens, and unpredictable weather. Surviving such an environment would have required strategies vastly different from those of their high-altitude relatives. They may have tracked rainfall patterns, understood the behavior of forest animals, navigated island coastlines, and developed ways to avoid disease long before Homo sapiens reached these shores. Their immune-related genetic contributions hint at this ancient expertise, now preserved in populations who inherited their strengths. The genetic differences between Denisovan branches underscore the possibility that they developed culturally distinct lifeways shaped by the environments they dominated. One group may have become mountain specialists, another forest navigators, and the third cold-adapted hunters moving across the northern plains. These variations mirror the diversity seen among early Homo sapiens, who also formed regional cultures adapted to their surroundings. If Denisovans exhibited similar diversity, then their material culture may have been too fragmented for archaeologists to recognize as belonging to a single lineage. It is also possible that Denisovans relied heavily on perishable materials, wood, fibers, hides, that disintegrated long ago. In tropical regions, organic artifacts disappear rapidly. In mountainous areas, wind and ice scatter traces across vast terrain. If Denisovans built shelters from branches, wove baskets, crafted clothing from animal skins, or carved tools from bone, little of it would survive today. Their absence in the archaeological record may reflect not a lack of sophistication, but a material world that simply did not endure. Another intriguing question concerns their cognitive abilities. The genetic similarities between Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans suggest they shared the neurological foundations for complex thought, planning, and symbolic behavior. Their interbreeding with both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals demonstrates social tolerance and communication. Even the existence of hybrid individuals hints at overlapping cultural spheres where friendships, alliances, or shared territories could have formed. The fact that Denisovans thrived for so long in such varied environments suggests they were not merely reacting to their surroundings, they were actively shaping their survival strategies through learning and adaptation. The lack of art or symbolic objects linked to Denisovans is often cited as evidence of cognitive differences, but this absence may be misleading. If Denisovan symbolic behavior relied on pigments, temporary shelters, body adornments, or rituals performed around fire pits, these practices would vanish without a trace over tens of thousands of years. Many early Homo sapiens cultural expressions disappeared in the same way. Without deliberate preservation, most evidence of symbolic life erodes quickly, leaving behind only the most durable artifacts. Denisovans may have expressed themselves in ways the archaeological record cannot preserve, yet their genetic legacy continues to whisper clues about how they lived. The endurance of Denisovan-derived adaptations indicates that their survival strategies were not accidental. They worked well enough to shape human evolution long after Denisovans themselves vanished. These inherited advantages suggest a lineage that understood its world deeply, responded intelligently to challenges, and thrived in places where even modern populations require time to adapt. This picture of Denisovans as skilled, knowledgeable humans capable of mastering extreme and diverse environments transforms the way we view the ancient world. Instead of a landscape dominated by Homo sapiens' ingenuity, it becomes a shared stage where multiple human species innovated, adapted, and contributed to the future in ways we are only beginning to uncover. And sometimes, the most revealing stories come not from what ancient people left behind, but from what they carried forward inside us. Quiet reminders that the past was never as simple as we once imagined. As Denisovan research grew more advanced, scientists began to confront one of the most perplexing contradictions in human prehistory. A lineage capable of shaping the biology of millions of people today, yet almost entirely missing from the physical record. The deeper researchers looked, the clearer it became that the Denisovan puzzle was not simply about genetics or archaeology alone. It was about the relationship between time, landscape, and preservation, and how these forces decide whose story survives and whose nearly vanishes. Throughout Asia, dozens of caves, riverbanks, and open-air sites contain stone tools dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Many of these artifacts cannot be confidently assigned to any specific species. Some look similar to Neanderthal tools, others resemble early Homo sapiens technologies, and many appear to be transitional or regionally unique. The problem is that tool styles alone cannot distinguish species, especially when multiple human groups occupied the same territory at overlapping times. If Denisovans lived across this vast region for tens of thousands of years, they almost certainly contributed to these tool assemblages. But without identifiable remains, the connection remains buried beneath layers of uncertainty. In some parts of China, particularly in the Nihewan Basin and surrounding regions, Archaeological sites reveal sophisticated stone tools predating known Homo sapiens presence. These tools include finely crafted blades and scrapers that suggest planning and skill. Yet none have been definitively linked to Denisovans. The same is true for sites in Southeast Asia, where ancient stone industries appear long before the earliest evidence of modern humans. Each of these locations could represent a Denisovan presence, but the absence of DNA-capable remains leaves researchers unable to confirm what seems increasingly likely. Denisovans may have lived in far more places and for far longer periods than the cave in Siberia suggests. Environmental conditions also play a critical role in this mystery. DNA preservation requires stable, cold environments, conditions rare across much of Asia. Denisova Cave is exceptional in that its microclimate preserved organic material for over 100,000 years. But in the humid tropics, where Denisovan ancestry is strongest among modern populations, DNA decays rapidly. Bones rot, artifacts erode, and sediment layers shift, leaving little behind. Even if Denisovan groups thrived there, the climate itself may have erased their physical presence. This may explain why the richest Denisovan genetic signatures appear in areas where archaeology is least able to preserve their remains. Beyond climate, the landscapes themselves have changed dramatically since Denisovans walked the earth. Rising sea levels after the last ice age inundated vast coastal regions across Southeast Asia, Australia, and Melanesia. These coastlines, now underwater, were likely densely populated, offering abundant food and stable climates. Any Denisovan settlements there would have been swallowed by the sea, hidden beneath meters of sediment and coral. This submerged world, often called Sundaland, may hold some of the most important missing chapters of Denisovan history, chapters that will remain inaccessible unless underwater archaeology advances significantly in the coming decades. Another factor complicating the Denisovan search is the vastness of Asia itself. The continent contains remote mountain ranges, deep jungles, and deserts rarely visited by researchers. Many potential Denisovan sites remain unexplored simply because of logistical challenges. In regions of Papua New Guinea and the Philippines, rugged terrain and dense vegetation make archaeological surveys extremely difficult. Likewise, the Himalayan foothills contain thousands of caves, many of which have never been excavated. The Denisovan story may lie inside one of these untouched cavities, waiting for the right discovery. As new fossils continue to surface across Asia, scientists are re-examining old collections with fresh eyes. Bones once thought to belong to early Homo sapiens or unnamed archaic humans are undergoing genetic or protein analysis. The Shahi mandible was one such rediscovery, a fossil overlooked for decades before technological advancements revealed its Denisovan lineage. Similar surprises may be hidden in other museum drawers, mislabeled or stored away without realizing their significance. The shifting landscape of human origins has taught researchers never to assume that a skull, jaw, or fragment belongs to a familiar species simply because it resembles one. This broader context transforms the Denisovan mystery from a simple question, who were they, into a complex detective story involving deep time, fragile evidence, and vast unknown landscapes. Their absence is not a single gap, but a constellation of missing details scattered across continents. Every clue suggests that Denisovans were a major presence in ancient Asia, deeply woven into ecosystems and human lineages alike. And yet the Earth itself, through erosion, climate, and shifting terrain, has erased almost every trace of them. Understanding this tension between genetic presence and archaeological absence is essential to unraveling their story. It reminds us that prehistory is not defined by what survives, but by what once lived, much of which may now exist only as whispers carried inside the DNA of modern people. As more evidence accumulated, researchers realized that the Denisovan mystery was not simply the result of missing fossils. It was the consequence of how ancient human landscapes were shaped, destroyed, or transformed over unimaginable spans of time. The physical world that Denisovans inhabited barely resembles the one we see today. Rivers shifted courses, mountains eroded, forests expanded and shrank, and entire regions now lie beneath the ocean. In many ways, the Denisovans disappeared not because they left no trace, but because the earth itself moved their traces elsewhere. One of the most difficult regions for archaeologists to study is island Southeast Asia, where some of the highest levels of Denisovan ancestry persist today. The islands of the Philippines, Indonesia, and Melanesia were once part of massive connected land masses during the Ice Ages. These huge land bridges created migration routes that no longer exist. When sea levels rose, sometimes by more than 120 meters, those ancient landscapes drowned. Shorelines where settlements likely stood are now on the seafloor. Freshwater springs, forests, and caves that sustained ancient populations vanished under layers of sand and coral. Any Denisovan shelters, hearths, or tools that once existed there are now unreachable, preserved only in fragments of DNA carried forward by the people living on these islands today. Farther north, the mountainous regions of China and the Tibetan Plateau hold their own secrets. These landscapes contain countless caves tucked into cliff faces, many of which remain unexplored. Some are inaccessible without advanced climbing equipment. Others lie in remote valleys where seasonal weather makes research nearly impossible. The finding of the Shahi mandible proved that such places can hide clues of global significance. But for every cave that has been searched, there are thousands more waiting. Denisovan remains may simply lie in locations that scientists have not yet reached. Even in regions where archaeology is easier, identifying Denisovan artifacts poses unique challenges. Their material culture does not yet have clear, defining features. If Denisovan groups used tool-making traditions that resembled those of Neanderthals or early Homo sapiens, their presence could be hiding in plain sight. Stone blades, scrapers, and flakes scattered across Eurasia may belong to them, but without diagnostic skeletal evidence or residue that can be genetically tested, these tools remain anonymous. It is possible that some Denisovan populations used simple or expedient technologies that left little recognizable behind, tools made from bamboo, bone, or other organic materials now lost to time. Meanwhile, the genetic evidence provides a striking contrast. Denisovan signals appear again and again in populations separated by vast distances. The patterns are too structured to be coincidence. Each distinct Denisovan lineage paints the portrait of a group that did not merely pass through Asia, but inhabited it deeply. Some genetic signatures suggest long-term stability in particular regions, implying that Denisovans built communities, maintained traditions, and raised families generation after generation. These are not the patterns of wandering nomads with no sense of place. They are the markers of rooted societies whose footprints once dotted the Asian continent. The complexity of Denisovan ancestry also raises questions about how their populations interacted with each other. If multiple Denisovan groups existed, did they communicate across distances? Did they trade materials, share knowledge of landscapes, or occasionally meet along migration corridors? Or were these branches so isolated that they never realized other Denisovan groups existed? The deep genetic divergence found between northern and southern Denisovan lineages hints at long periods without contact, perhaps tens of thousands of years. This level of separation suggests ecological specialization, with different Denisovan branches adapted to distinct environments and rarely venturing outside them. Another possibility is that major climatic events physically divided their populations. Rising mountains, expanding glaciers, and shifting forests could have isolated groups long enough for significant genetic divergence to occur. When early Homo sapiens later encountered these scattered Denisovan branches, Each interaction produced different genetic legacies. This would explain why modern populations carry Denisovan ancestry that does not match the Siberian Denisovan genome, evidence of encounters with groups that have yet to be genetically identified. Yet, despite how thoroughly nature has hidden their remains, the Denisovans continue to reappear through the one medium time could not erase: their DNA, preserved inside humans whose ancestors crossed paths with them long ago. Every new genome sequenced, every unexpected adaptation traced, pushes their story a little further into the light. Piece by piece, the invisible becomes visible. And the more the picture sharpens, the more it feels like entire worlds once existed that we barely remember. Worlds built by hands we have never seen, but whose influence still lives quietly within our own. As scientists worked to fill the vast archaeological gaps surrounding Denisovans, a different frontier of research began to shine new light on their world: paleogenomics, the study of ancient genomes. Although Denisovan fossils are almost non-existent, the data contained within their DNA has become one of the most powerful tools for reconstructing their history. By comparing Denisovan genomes with those of modern humans and other ancient species, researchers have uncovered not only how Denisovans lived, but hints of interactions, migrations, and vanished populations that no excavation could reveal. One of the most startling discoveries came from analyzing introgression patterns, the way Denisovan DNA inserted itself into the genomes of modern populations. These patterns act like geological strata, preserving layers of contact over tens of thousands of years. In some regions, Denisovan ancestry appears in large, concentrated blocks, suggesting recent interbreeding events with substantial Denisovan populations. In others, only faint fragments remain, likely the legacy of ancient encounters where Denisovans were present but less numerous. These varying patterns reveal a diversity of Denisovan experiences. Some groups thrived for long periods, while others may have been smaller, isolated bands living at the margins of habitable territory. Even more intriguing are the signals that point to multiple Denisovan lineages, each genetically distinct from the others. This finding reshapes what scientists thought they knew about human evolution. Instead of a single Denisovan species spreading across Asia, the evidence suggests branch after branch of Denisovan populations, separated by geography, climate, and time. The Denisovan genome from Siberia represents just one piece of this network. Other populations, likely living in the tropics or along ancient coastlines, diverged so far from the Siberian lineage that they may have looked and behaved differently. Their DNA lives on in the people of Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, and parts of Australia, where Denisovan ancestry reaches levels far higher than anywhere else. Interbreeding between Denisovans and Homo sapiens paints its own picture. Geneticists can estimate when these interactions occurred based on the size of inherited DNA segments. Larger, more intact segments indicate more recent contact, while smaller fragments suggest older events. From this analysis, scientists identified at least 3 major interbreeding episodes: one in mainland Asia, one in Southeast Asia, and another near the Tibetan Plateau. These repeated interactions imply not brief encounters, but a long history of coexistence, shared hunting grounds, overlapping migratory paths, and potentially even shared technologies or cultural practices. One of the most debated questions in this field is the possibility that Denisovans interbred with other unknown hominin species before interacting with Homo sapiens. Some Denisovan genetic sequences show unusual patterns that do not match Neanderthals, modern humans, or any known fossil population. These ghost lineages, as scientists call them, suggest the presence of human groups that have not yet been identified. Their remains may lie undiscovered in caves or underwater sites, or they may have vanished without leaving a fossil record at all. But their genetic fingerprints live on within the Denisovan genome, hinting at ancient encounters that shaped the evolutionary landscape long before our species emerged. Paleogenomics also provides insight into how Denisovans survived extreme climates. Certain regions of the Denisovan genome contain variants that regulate oxygen use, fat metabolism, immune function, and temperature control. These variants did not arise randomly. They were sculpted by natural selection in environments ranging from icy glacial plains to the thin air of high-altitude plateaus. By studying these genes, scientists can reconstruct aspects of Denisovan life. Their need to conserve heat, resist diseases, and efficiently extract energy from scarce food resources. These adaptations reveal a species that thrived across an astonishing range of habitats. Yet perhaps the most transformative aspect of paleogenomics is what it reveals about the interconnectedness of ancient humans. For decades, the evolutionary tree was drawn with clean lines separating species. Homo erectus here, Neanderthals there, Homo sapiens in another branch altogether. But Denisovan DNA collapses these boundaries. The ancient world was not divided into isolated groups, but woven together by migrations, encounters, and interbreeding. Our ancestors did not simply replace the populations they encountered. They connected with them, shared genes with them, and created a complex tapestry of ancestry that still influences us today. As paleogenomics continues to refine these connections, the story of Denisovans becomes less about their disappearance and more about their contribution. Their DNA did not vanish with them. It became part of the global human inheritance. Every adaptation that made survival possible in harsh environments, every genetic trait that offered resilience, every lineage that crossed paths with Homo sapiens, all of it lives on quietly within modern populations. The more scientists analyze these ancient genomes, the clearer it becomes that Denisovans were far from a marginal species. They were innovators, survivors, and integral members of a world where human evolution was not a linear march, but a braided river of lives and lineages flowing together through time. As paleogenomics advanced, scientists began to use Denisovan DNA not just as a record of the past, but as a tool for exploring the hidden structure of ancient human populations. Their genome became a kind of Rosetta Stone, revealing how early humans split, drifted, merged, and adapted across the vastness of Eurasia. It was through this lens that researchers uncovered one of the most surprising revelations of all. Denisovans may have played a central role in shaping the evolutionary landscape long before Homo sapiens became the dominant species. One of the clearest examples comes from the study of immune-related genes. These genes help modern people respond to bacterial and viral threats and are among the strongest Denisovan contributions found in Southeast Asian and Oceanian populations. Their presence suggests that when Homo sapiens entered regions already inhabited by Denisovans, they encountered pathogens against which they had little natural resistance. Interbreeding effectively loaned incoming humans the immune defenses Denisovans had developed over many generations. This genetic exchange may have allowed Homo sapiens to settle in these environments far more quickly than they could have on their own. Without Denisovan immunity, large-scale migration into these tropical zones might have been far slower, or even impossible. Another category of Denisovan genes influences the development of teeth, skull shape, and jaw structure. These features rarely attract attention in popular discussions of human evolution, yet they reveal deep patterns of ecological specialization. In some modern populations, Denisovan-derived variants correlate with stronger jaws or particular dental forms that are thought to have been advantageous for processing certain types of food. These traits may reflect ancient dietary strategies Denisovans refined while adapting to different habitats. For Homo sapiens entering those same regions, inheriting these traits would have allowed them to take advantage of local food sources more effectively, from tough mountain plants to fibrous tropical vegetation. Researchers also uncovered Denisovan contributions in genes related to neurological development. These do not suggest cognitive superiority or inferiority. Instead, they point to subtle differences in brain development shaped by environmental pressures. Variants associated with fear responses, stress regulation, and sensory perception show faint Denisovan signatures in some Asian populations. While the significance of these findings is still debated, they hint that Denisovans developed adaptations not only to the physical world, but also to the psychological demands of survival in challenging landscapes. These traits may have been passed on to Homo sapiens who encountered similar threats. The picture grows even more complex when examining Denisovan interactions with Neanderthals. Evidence shows that these two archaic species interbred long before Homo sapiens entered the scene, leaving behind hybrid descendants who may have carried a mixture of traits beneficial for cold climates. These ancient interactions blur the lines between populations even further. Instead of three distinct human species evolving independently, the ancient world appears as a network of groups connected by occasional but meaningful gene flow. Denisovans may have served as a kind of evolutionary bridge, linking the adaptations of one population to another. This interconnectedness raises a fascinating possibility. Denisovans may have shaped the trajectories of multiple human species, not just Homo sapiens. Their genetic contributions to Neanderthals, for example, suggest that some traits we associate with Neanderthals, such as cold adaptation, may have been influenced by even earlier Denisovan-like populations. If true, Denisovan evolutionary influence stretches deeper into history than anyone imagined. Another key insight emerging from paleogenomics is that Denisovan populations were not static. Their genomes show signs of selection over long periods, indicating that they were responding dynamically to climate changes and environmental pressures. They endured glacial cycles, shifting ecosystems, and migrations of predators and prey. Their adaptive genes reflect a history of constant negotiation with the environment, a long dance between survival and extinction that shaped their biology and ultimately influenced the survival of others. These findings challenge the traditional view of human evolution as a ladder with Homo sapiens at the top. Instead, they suggest a branching forest where Denisovans, Neanderthals, and modern humans exchanged ideas, in the form of genes, whenever fate brought them together. This exchange did not diminish any group, it made all of them more resilient. Evolution, in this sense, was not a competition, but a shared effort in the face of overwhelming environmental forces. Paleogenomics also reveals the limits of our understanding. Every new genome sequenced uncovers fragments of Denisovan DNA that do not match anything in the known fossil record. These unmatched sequences hint at hidden populations, human groups that lived, thrived, and vanished without leaving a single identifiable bone behind. Denisovans may have been part of a much larger human ecosystem, with multiple species interacting across Asia in ways we have only begun to imagine. This realization widens the scope of human prehistory, opening the door to possibilities scholars once considered unthinkable. Each discovery adds another brushstroke to a portrait that is still mostly blank, but undeniably alive. Despite the silence of their artifacts, Denisovans continue to shape our understanding of what it means to be human. They remind us that evolution was not a straight path, but a mosaic, a shared inheritance of strengths forged in landscapes long erased by time. And sometimes, the faintest traces, tiny fragments of ancient code folded quietly into our own, can illuminate worlds far larger and more mysterious than the ones we think we know. As researchers continued decoding the Denisovan genome and mapping its influence across modern populations, another frontier emerged, one focused not on survival or adaptation, but on movement. For decades, scientists believed ancient human migrations followed predictable paths, small groups leaving Africa dispersing along coastlines and gradually radiating inland. But Denisovan ancestry patterns challenge many of these assumptions, suggesting that ancient humans may have traveled far more widely and far earlier than traditional models allowed. The distribution of Denisovan DNA reveals an intricate mosaic rather than a simple dispersal wave. In places like Papua New Guinea, Australian Aboriginal populations, the Philippines, and certain Indonesian islands, Denisovan ancestry is strikingly high, far higher than anywhere else in the world. Yet these regions were separated by significant geographic barriers, even during periods of lower sea levels. This raises an important question. How did Denisovan lineages reach these distant islands? Some researchers propose that Denisovans, or the archaic humans who interbred with early Homo sapiens in these regions, may have possessed rudimentary seafaring abilities. Crossing short water gaps, even with simple rafts, would have been enough to move between islands. While there is no direct archaeological evidence of Denisovan boats, the genetic distribution strongly suggests they did not remain confined to continental land masses. Human presence in Wallacea, an island region separated from mainland Asia by deep ocean trenches, cannot be explained solely through accidental drift. Purposeful movement, even at a basic level, may have played a role. The geography of Pleistocene Asia further complicates this picture. During glacial periods, the continent transformed dramatically. What is now Southeast Asia was once a vast landmass called Sundaland, connecting major islands into a single, sprawling region. Ancient Marian rivers carved fertile corridors through forests and grasslands, creating ideal routes for migration. Denisovan groups moving across this landscape would have encountered diverse environments: coastal plains rich in seafood, inland valleys filled with game, and rugged uplands offering shelter from climatic extremes. This diversity may have encouraged the development of regional Denisovan populations, each adapting in unique ways to their surroundings. Meanwhile, the northern realms of Asia presented different challenges. The Siberian Denisovan population, represented by the genome found in Denisova Cave, appears to have lived at the frontier between glacial and temperate zones. Their presence in such a harsh environment implies seasonal movement, perhaps following herds south during the coldest months, then returning northward as temperatures rose. Their survival in these shifting conditions would have required detailed environmental knowledge: the location of safe shelters, migration patterns of prey, water sources that remained unfrozen, and cues that signaled seasonal change. These patterns of movement also shaped interactions with other human species. As Homo sapiens expanded into Asia in multiple waves, they encountered different Denisovan branches at different times. Some encounters occurred in mainland territories, others on islands, and still others in the high-altitude corridors leading toward the Tibetan Plateau. Each interaction produced a different genetic legacy, reflecting the distinct Denisovan populations they met. This layered ancestry shows that Denisovan groups were not static. They moved through Asia in complex ways that intersected with human migrations again and again. Even within Denisovan populations, movement appears to have been a defining feature. Genetic divergence between northern and southern Denisovan lineages suggests long periods of isolation, followed by intermittent recontact. These cycles mirror the rhythms of glacial expansion and retreat. When climates cooled, forests receded and grasslands spread, potentially allowing different Denisovan groups to expand and reconnect. When climates warmed, rising seas and dense vegetation may have once again separated them into isolated pockets. Over tens of thousands of years, these natural cycles shaped the Denisovan world as profoundly as any technological or cultural development. The Himalayan region adds another dimension to this story. The presence of Denisovan-derived high-altitude adaptations suggests that at least one Denisovan population moved into and persisted within some of the most formidable terrain on Earth. Surviving at altitudes above 4,000 meters requires extraordinary physiological resilience. The fact that this adaptation exists today in Tibetan populations means Denisovans lived long enough in these heights to develop stable, inheritable traits. But mountain ecosystems are dynamic. Glacial advances and retreats would have periodically transformed valleys, lakes, and passes. Denisovans living in these environments likely followed routes carved by ice and meltwater, traveling along natural corridors that remain largely unexplored by archaeology. What emerges from all these lines of evidence is a portrait of a species deeply attuned to the rhythms of the natural world. Denisovans did not travel aimlessly. Their movements appear to reflect deliberate patterns shaped by food availability, climate shifts, and long-term knowledge of landscapes. These patterns, passed from generation to generation, allowed them to navigate environments as varied as tropical forests, Siberian steppes, and high-altitude plateaus. The traces of these journeys survive not in maps or artifacts, but in the genomes of people whose ancestors crossed paths with them long ago. Each genetic marker acts like a waypoint, marking where ancient lives once intersected. And as scientists continue decoding these markers, the Denisovan world, its migrations, its landscapes, its challenges, slowly rises from the deep silence of prehistory. As scientists reconstructed the possible paths Denisovan groups may have followed across Asia, another profound question emerged. What did these journeys mean for the interactions between Denisovans and early Homo sapiens? Genetic evidence makes one thing clear. Contact was not rare, accidental, or fleeting. It was part of the fabric of ancient human life. Populations did not exist in isolation. They overlapped in landscapes where necessity, opportunity, and environment all shaped how different humans met, cooperated, or competed. These interactions unfolded against the backdrop of constantly shifting ecosystems. When sea levels fell and land bridges formed, routes opened that allowed populations to move, explore, or pursue game into new regions. When climates warmed, these routes disappeared again, forcing groups back into familiar territories or pushing them into conflict over dwindling resources. Amid these transitions, Denisovans and early Homo sapiens must have encountered one another repeatedly. In some regions, such as Southeast Asia, the genetic legacy suggests sustained engagement rather than brief encounters. In others, the patterns look more like isolated moments, rare crossings preserved only by a few surviving genetic fragments. But beyond interbreeding, scientists are beginning to consider the cultural dimension of these meetings. Even without evidence of Denisovan art or symbolic traditions, it is almost impossible to imagine two human groups living in close proximity without some form of information exchange. Early Homo sapiens entering new environments would have benefited immensely from observing Denisovan strategies, how they tracked prey, navigated dangerous terrain, or understood seasonal cycles. Likewise, Denisovans may have encountered technologies brought by Homo sapiens, such as refined blade techniques, improved fire control, or new forms of tool hafting. Mutual influence, even indirect, could have shaped the development of both groups in subtle ways. This leads to a broader insight. Ancient humans did not evolve only through biology. They evolved through shared knowledge, formed in the spaces where different populations met. Even small exchanges, a hunting technique observed from afar, a migration route followed by chance, or a new resource discovered through imitation, could ripple through generations. In this sense, the Denisovan Homo sapiens relationship may have influenced far more than genetics. It may have reshaped how early humans understood the world itself. The environments where these interactions occurred also mattered. In mountainous regions, survival required knowledge of high-altitude plants, water sources, and safe shelters during sudden storms. In tropical forests, danger came from venomous animals, unpredictable weather, and hidden disease. On the Siberian plains, the challenge was extreme cold, scarce food, and vast distances. Denisovans adapted to all these environments over long periods, acquiring skills that Homo sapiens newcomers simply did not have. Through interbreeding, humans inherited biological advantages. Through proximity, they may have absorbed ecological wisdom. Some researchers argue that this shared wisdom might survive, faintly, in indigenous traditions across the regions where Denisovan ancestry remains strongest. Stories of mountain spirits, forest guardians, or ancient people who lived in remote places could echo deep memories of encounters with populations different from Homo sapiens, but still recognizably human. These tales cannot serve as evidence, but they remind us that ancient contact zones may have produced cultural legacies that persist in ways we cannot yet measure. From a genetic perspective, interactions between Denisovans and Homo sapiens may have played a crucial role in the success of early human migrations. Without Denisovan genes enhancing immunity, oxygen efficiency, or climatic tolerance, some populations might have struggled to adapt to their new environments. These inherited traits acted like shortcuts, accelerated pathways that allowed Homo sapiens to thrive where they had previously been at a disadvantage. Over generations, these advantages compounded, enabling humans to spread further and faster than any of their ancestors. Yet while the genetic record preserves these encounters, the archaeological record remains almost entirely silent. No settlements show clear signs of mixed populations, no shared tool industries tell a combined story, and no symbolic objects reveal cross-cultural exchange. Instead, the evidence rests in fragments of DNA tucked inside millions of people who never realize they carry the imprint of a vanished human lineage. This silence leaves space for speculation, but also for humility. We often imagine ancient humans as isolated tribes, fiercely separate from one another. But Denisovan genetics reveals a world built on overlapping lives, shared landscapes, and complex relationships that defy simple narratives. Their legacy shows that evolution was not just shaped by who survived, but by who met, who mixed, and who learned from one another. And sometimes, the briefest encounters between ancient peoples, moments lost without a trace, become the very threads that bind their descendants together, long after the landscapes that shaped them have disappeared beneath ice, forest, or sea. As researchers piece together the Denisovan presence across Asia, another dimension of the mystery emerged, one that touched not on migration, adaptation, or interbreeding, but on memory. Not genetic memory, but cultural memory. Stories, myths, and ancient traditions that seem to echo encounters with beings who do not fit neatly into the categories of humans we know from the archaeological record. While scientists remain cautious, some anthropologists have begun exploring the idea that Denisovans may live on not only in DNA, but in the stories passed down by the descendants of those who once shared the land with them. Across the Himalayas, for example, legends speak of people who lived high in the mountains long before the arrival of present-day groups, beings described as strong, quiet, and capable of surviving the bitter cold without difficulty. These stories sometimes portray them as helpers, sometimes as solitary wanderers who preferred remote valleys and wind-swept ridges. While such tales cannot be used as direct evidence, they resonate in a curious way with the Denisovan-derived altitude adaptations now found in Tibetan populations. If ancient Himalayan communities encountered members of a cold-adapted population, memories of those encounters could have persisted long after the last Denisovan groups faded. In the dense forests of Southeast Asia, similar traditions exist. Among some indigenous groups, there are accounts of forest-dwelling people who lived apart from humans, emerging only occasionally and leaving behind footprints larger than expected. These stories are often framed as myth, but they reflect an ancient familiarity with landscapes shaped by multiple hominin species. The Philippines, for instance, contains both a high level of Denisovan ancestry and the remains of Homo luzonensis, another mysterious ancient human. The region may have once hosted a diversity of populations whose interactions left traces not only in genomes, but also in cultural memory. Further east, among Melanesian communities, oral histories sometimes describe ancient first people who were present before later arrivals. These accounts attribute unique abilities to these early inhabitants, strength, endurance, or unusual skills tied to the land and sea. Modern Melanesians carry some of the highest Denisovan ancestry on Earth, suggesting deep ancestral ties to populations that lived there long before Homo sapiens fully settled the region. It is impossible to say what aspects of these stories, if any, relate to Denisovans, but their persistence across generations hints at a complicated past in which multiple human groups shaped the early human experience in ways that archaeology alone cannot reveal. The possibility that Denisovans influenced ancient cultural traditions does not mean they left behind a shared mythology or symbolic system. Instead, it suggests that early humans may have perceived Denisovans not as mythic beings, but as another kind of people, familiar, strange, and sometimes distant. Encounters between different human species may have been woven into the collective consciousness of early communities, reinterpreted over time as language evolved and memories shifted. Even if these stories changed beyond recognition, the kernel of human experience may still lie within them. Understanding this perspective requires rethinking how culture forms and survives. Oral traditions, unlike artifacts, are shaped by memory and meaning rather than material preservation. They evolve with each telling, responding to the needs and imagination of the community. But they can also preserve remarkable echoes of ancient events. Some indigenous Australian stories, for example, describe coastline changes that occurred more than 7,000 years ago, long before any written record. If such memories were preserved for millennia, it is not unreasonable to wonder whether older memories might also survive in symbolic or metaphorical form. The concept of cultural memory adds a new layer to the Denisovan mystery. Their disappearance from the archaeological record may not have erased them from the human mind. Instead, fragments of their existence could have been preserved through stories, rituals, or beliefs that early Homo sapiens carried with them as they migrated across Asia and the Pacific. These fragments, though distorted by time, may offer hints about how Denisovans looked, behaved, or interacted with other humans. Genetic research reinforces this possibility by revealing that Denisovan traits were not incidental. Their influence on immunity, altitude tolerance, and metabolism would have shaped how early Homo sapiens experienced unfamiliar environments. For communities living in harsh landscapes, these inherited advantages could have been interpreted through cultural lenses, attributes that distinguished certain families, clans, or groups. Over time, stories might have emerged to explain these inherited differences, blending biological reality with symbolic meaning. While none of this provides definitive evidence, it challenges the assumption that the Denisovan story exists only in DNA and the silent bones of Siberia. Human evolution is not just a tale of adaptation and migration. It is also a tapestry of lived experience. The people who encountered Denisovans did not experience them as data points, but as neighbors, strangers, rivals, or occasional allies. The impact of these encounters may have shaped not only genes, but identities and worldviews. And though archaeology may struggle to uncover their physical traces, the enduring presence of Denisovan DNA reminds us that ancient humans did not navigate their world alone. They shared it with beings whose stories were almost lost, yet whose legacy continues quietly in the people who walk those same landscapes today. The possibility that echoes of Denisovan presence survived in ancient myths led researchers to examine another domain where past and present intersect: the living landscapes themselves. Environments across Asia and Oceania hold clues, not in the form of bones or tools, but in ecological patterns, migration routes, and the ways local populations interact with the natural world. These clues, when overlaid with genetic data, hint at ancient relationships between humans and environments shaped in part by Denisovan knowledge and adaptation. the Himalayan region, for example, high-altitude communities maintain seasonal rhythms that align closely with the natural constraints of the plateau. These rhythms, passed down across countless generations, might reflect strategies that enabled survival long before recorded history. The way herders know which pastures remain safe during harsh winters, or how certain valleys remain accessible despite snowpack, mirrors the kinds of environmental understanding that Denisovans would have needed. The high-altitude adaptation itself suggests prolonged residence in these elevations, and with it, a deep familiarity with the land. While it is impossible to trace modern practices directly back to Denisovan groups, the continuity of mountain lifeways raises the possibility that knowledge once shared between species became woven into the survival strategies of later populations. Far to the south, the forests and coastlines of island Southeast Asia contain their own clues. Indigenous groups in these regions possess detailed knowledge of tides, currents, edible plants, and animal behavior, knowledge that likely evolved across long periods of coexistence with diverse human species. Some of these practices, including hunting techniques or forest navigation methods, have no obvious equivalents in mainland Asia. They appear to be tailored to dense, humid environments where visibility is limited and danger often comes from ambush predators or poisonous species. Denisovans, especially the southern lineages with deep genetic influence in these regions, would have navigated similar challenges. Their presence may have shaped early ecological strategies that persisted long after their physical traces disappeared. In Melanesia, where Denisovan ancestry reaches its highest levels, traditions surrounding land stewardship, fishing, and environmental balance often emphasize relationships between people and ancestral beings tied to specific places. While these concepts belong firmly to the cultural worlds of the communities that hold them, some anthropologists note that these traditions reflect an unusually deep temporal connection to the landscape, one that may extend back to the earliest humans who settled those islands. If Denisovan groups were among those early inhabitants, it is conceivable that elements of their ecological knowledge blended into the practices of later populations, surviving not through artifacts but through continuity of life on the same land. As researchers explore these intersections, they face a challenge: how to distinguish what comes from Denisovan influence from what arose independently in early Homo sapiens. Genetic adaptations offer clear signatures, but cultural expressions are far more fluid. Even so, the alignment between certain inherited traits and long-term ecological practices presents a compelling pattern. In regions where Denisovan DNA contributes to altitude tolerance, local cultures have developed sophisticated strategies for mountain living. In regions where Denisovan DNA enhances immune defenses, traditional healing practices include remedies for tropical infections that have been refined over thousands of years. These parallels do not prove direct transmission, but they hint at a deeper entanglement between biological and cultural inheritance. This entanglement becomes even more striking when considering the diversity of ancient human species across Asia. Besides Denisovans, fossils like Homo floresiensis and Homo luzonensis show that the continent hosted multiple distinct hominin groups well into the late Pleistocene. These populations likely interacted with each other and with early Homo sapiens in ways we cannot fully reconstruct. Denisovan DNA survives because their interbreeding events were genetically successful, but cultural interactions with other hominin groups may have left traces we cannot identify. Asia's deep human history was not a simple sequence of arrivals and extinctions. It was a vast web of encounters, exchanges, and coexistence. In this context, Denisovans stand as a reminder that the ancient world was populated by people who may have looked different, lived differently, and adapted differently, yet still shared the same landscapes, challenges, and moments of survival. Their legacy in modern populations suggests that they were not marginal or peripheral. They were deeply integrated into the evolutionary and environmental history of the regions they inhabited. The continued presence of their genes and the possibility that fragments of their knowledge persist in cultural traditions speaks to a resilience that transcends the loss of their material record. This perspective transforms the Denisovan story from one of disappearance into one of continuity. They may no longer walk the earth, but their influence persists in the breath of people at high altitudes, in the resilience of immune systems shaped by ancient pathogens, and perhaps even in the rhythms of life passed from parent to child in remote mountain villages or coastal settlements. And it is in these quiet inheritances, these subtle ties between past and present, that the Denisovan world feels closest, like a presence just beyond the reach of archaeology, lingering in the ways people still live on the land their ancestors once shared with another kind of human. As the genetic and archaeological clues continued to evolve, researchers found themselves confronting a question far larger than Denisovans themselves. What does it truly mean to reconstruct a vanished human lineage when nearly all its physical traces have been erased? The Denisovan case forced science to wrestle with the limits of evidence and to imagine new ways of interpreting the human past that rely not only on bones and tools, but on the shadows cast by ancient interactions. Traditional paleoanthropology depends on fossils, stone technology, and stratigraphy. Yet Denisovans left almost none of these behind. Aside from a few fragments, a finger bone, a tooth, a genetic signal extracted from sediments, their existence might have remained unknown. This absence challenges the assumption that the most important human histories are those preserved in stone. Denisovans compel us to look to invisible evidence, encoded in genes and landscapes. In doing so, they reveal the vastness of what we have not yet discovered. This new perspective forces researchers to reinterpret data from regions long considered peripheral to human evolution. For instance, China and Southeast Asia contain fossils that do not fit neatly into existing species categories. Skulls with unexpected combinations of archaic and modern traits have puzzled anthropologists for decades. Without genetic analysis, many of these remains were assigned to generic labels such as archaic Homo or transitional populations. But Denisovan DNA suggests another possibility. Some of these puzzling fossils might belong to Denisovan subgroups or to populations that interbred with Denisovans before encountering Homo sapiens. This view reframes old discoveries, transforming dusty museum specimens into potential keys to an entire hidden chapter of humanity. The methods used to retrieve and interpret ancient DNA have also advanced dramatically. Early techniques required well-preserved bone samples, but new methods allow researchers to extract DNA from sediments, teeth, or even tiny fragments that would once have been dismissed. In Denisova Cave, scientists recovered DNA not only from bones, but from soil layers, detecting traces of hominin presence with no accompanying physical remains. These methods open the door to similar discoveries elsewhere. Caves across Asia, long excavated for artifacts but not for genetic material, may hold invisible evidence of Denisovan populations just waiting to be uncovered. This shift toward genetic archaeology also raises philosophical questions about how we define species. If Denisovans interbred with both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and carried genes from an even older unknown lineage, then the boundaries between species become more porous than previously believed. Ancient humans were not isolated categories, but a network of populations exchanging genes and adaptations over long periods. The evolutionary tree becomes less like a branching diagram and more like a braided river system, with channels merging, separating, and merging again. Within this braided system, Denisovans represent a crucial but enigmatic thread. Their genome contains evidence of selection pressures that shaped human physiology long before the rise of complex societies. Traits we now associate with certain populations, like high-altitude resilience among Tibetans, began as Denisovan adaptations to environments others found uninhabitable. In this sense, Denisovans served as pioneers of ecological niches that Homo sapiens later entered. Their absence from the fossil record does not diminish their impact. If anything, it highlights how profoundly incomplete the record truly is. Another emerging field, known as paleoproteomics, expands the toolkit even further. Instead of DNA, this method analyzes ancient proteins preserved in fossils too old or degraded for genetic extraction. The Shahi mandible was identified as Denisovan through such protein analysis, demonstrating the technique's potential. Paleoproteomics may reveal Denisovan identities in specimens where DNA has decayed beyond recovery. As the method improves, it may confirm long-suspected connections between Denisovans and puzzling fossils in China, Southeast Asia, or even Central Asia. Beyond bones and genes, researchers are also examining population modeling, using simulations to reconstruct ancient demographic trends. These models suggest that Denisovan populations rose and fell over tens of thousands of years, influenced by climate cycles, resource availability, and competition from other hominins. Some models propose large, stable Denisovan populations. Others suggest small, isolated groups that expanded during certain climate periods. These shifting scenarios illustrate how fragile human survival could be and how even successful populations might disappear without leaving clear traces. In these models, interactions with Homo sapiens play a central role. Some Denisovan groups may have merged almost entirely into incoming human populations, losing their distinct identities but passing on valuable genes. Others may have retreated into shrinking refuges until environmental change or demographic pressures wiped them out. Each region likely tells a different story, shaped by geography, climate, and chance. What unites them is the sense that Denisovans lived not at the margins, but as part of the tapestry of ancient humanity. As research expands, the Denisovan mystery serves as a reminder that our understanding of human evolution remains incomplete, shaped as much by absence as by presence. They are a lineage defined not by monuments or skeletons, but by the traces they left within us, and by the shadows they cast across the landscapes they once called home. As the Denisovan picture grew clearer, researchers were confronted with a startling realization. The very tools they relied upon to reconstruct human history, bones, artifacts, stratigraphy, were insufficient to capture the true scale of ancient human diversity. Denisovans revealed a world where lineages could flourish for hundreds of thousands of years, and yet leave almost no physical trace behind. That realization forced scientists to rethink not only how they search for ancient humans, but how they define them in the first place. One of the most profound insights came from comparing Denisovan genetics with that of other archaic populations. The Denisovan genome shows deep divergence not only from Homo sapiens, but also from Neanderthals. Yet this divergence does not align neatly with physical differences because we lack a complete Denisovan skeleton. Instead, the genome reveals ancient splits, admixtures, and absorptions that complicate the species concept itself. If two populations diverged for hundreds of thousands of years, yet still produced fertile offspring, should they be considered separate species, or simply distant branches of a single interconnected human family? This question becomes even more complex when considering the ghost lineages detected in Denisovan DNA. These unknown hominins contributed genetic material to Denisovan ancestors long before Homo sapiens encountered them. Their identities remain completely hidden. No fossils, no artifacts, no known habitat range. Yet their DNA echoes within Denisovan genomes like faint signals from a forgotten era. Their existence suggests that Denisovans were not a single isolated group, but part of a vast network of archaic humans who interacted in ways we cannot yet reconstruct. This hidden diversity may reshape our understanding of the human past more profoundly than any fossil ever could. Population modeling adds further complexity. Some simulations suggest that Denisovan groups were spread across Asia in multiple waves, with periods of expansion followed by contraction. Climate cycles, glacial advances, warming periods, shifts in rainfall may have created repeated bottlenecks, fragmenting Denisovan populations into isolated enclaves. Over tens of thousands of years, isolation could produce new Denisovan subgroups, each with unique adaptations. When these groups later encountered Homo sapiens, the resulting interbreeding created the patchwork ancestry we see today. The archaeological silence surrounding Denisovans may therefore reflect not absence, but disappearance through absorption. If small Denisovan populations merged into larger Homo sapiens groups, their cultural identity might have faded, even as their genes persisted. The same process occurs in many human societies throughout history. One group is absorbed into another, leaving traces not in artifacts but in language, customs, or family lineages. In the ancient world, where survival could hinge on forming alliances or sharing shelter during harsh seasons, such absorption may have been common. Over time, the distinctions between populations would blur until only subtle genetic signals remained. This perspective transforms how we think about human evolution. Instead of rigid separations between species, the ancient world appears as a continuum of related populations, each adapting, moving, and interacting in response to changing environments. Denisovans were part of this continuum, influencing and being influenced by the humans around them. Their disappearance may have been gradual, occurring not through abrupt extinction, but through millions of quiet moments, marriages, births, migrations, and shared challenges that blended their lineage into others. Yet even as their physical identity faded, their genetic legacy endured. Modern populations that carry Denisovan DNA are living evidence of the vast, interconnected web of ancient human interaction. The adaptations inherited from Denisovans remain crucial in many environments today, helping people survive at high altitudes, resist disease, and cope with temperature extremes. These living descendants offer a window into the deep relationship between environment and evolution, a relationship Denisovans navigated with remarkable success. Looking beyond survival traits, researchers have also uncovered subtle influences Denisovan DNA may have on modern physiology and development. Some variants are associated with metabolism, others with neurological pathways. While these effects are difficult to interpret, they underscore the fact that Denisovans were not biologically static. They evolved to meet the demands of their environments just as Homo sapiens did. The genes they passed on reflect the challenges they overcame, encoded into the bodies of people who may never know the ancient origins of their resilience. This blending of populations raises questions about identity, both ancient and modern. If Denisovans contributed to the biological diversity of today's humans, then their legacy is not confined to remote regions or isolated islands. It is part of a broader human story, one that emphasizes shared ancestry over separation. In this sense, Denisovans challenge the assumption that humanity's success stems solely from the qualities of Homo sapiens. Instead, it reflects the contributions of many lineages whose strengths, adaptations, and encounters helped shape the world we now inhabit. Their story is not one of failure or disappearance, but of transformation. They did not vanish. They interwove with others, becoming part of a broader human fabric. Their influence remains invisible, yet fundamental, like a foundation beneath a structure, unseen but essential. And as scientists continue unraveling their genetic imprint, Denisovans remind us that prehistory was once filled with peoples whose lives flowed into ours in ways we are only beginning to understand. Sometimes, the most enduring legacies are the ones that never announce themselves. They simply live on quietly, carried forward by the descendants of those who once walked beside them.
As the scientific investigation into Denisovan origins matured, a broader understanding began to form, one that reached far beyond the specifics of ancient DNA, archaeological sites, or evolutionary timelines. The Denisovan story ultimately forced researchers to confront a profound truth about humanity's past. Our species did not emerge alone, did not rise in isolation, and did not walk into an empty world. Instead, Homo sapiens entered a landscape already shaped by other humans, some familiar, others now lost to time, whose adaptations, knowledge, and presence influenced the very pathways of human expansion. This realization marked a turning point in paleoanthropology. For much of the 20th century, the narrative of human evolution was dominated by a simple structure. Homo sapiens evolved in Africa, spread across the globe, and replaced older species through superior intelligence, innovation, or adaptability. Denisovans shattered that narrative by showing that replacement was neither clean nor complete. The evidence revealed instead a world of intersections, where different humans met, mingled, and sometimes merged. One of the most striking outcomes of this shift is the gradual recognition that Homo sapiens owe far more to these ancient encounters than previously acknowledged. Genes linked to immunity, metabolism, altitude tolerance, and cold adaptation did not originate within our species. They were inherited from Denisovans, from Neanderthals, and potentially from other unknown human groups whose identities have yet to be uncovered. These contributions were not trivial. They influenced who survived, who migrated, and who thrived. Without them, human expansion into high mountains, tropical forests, or frigid plains might have been delayed by thousands of years. This realization reframed migration itself. Instead of a species radiating outward from Africa as a single cohesive wave, humanity appears as a network of journeys, shaped at every step by interactions with others. Each region contains its own legacy. In Siberia, early Homo sapiens encountered cold-adapted Denisovan groups who had mastered extreme winter climates. In Southeast Asia, incoming humans met Denisovan-descended populations adapted to dense forests and tropical pathogens. In the Himalayas, the physiological signature of Denisovan survival continues to shape life at high altitudes to this day. These encounters blurred boundaries, creating populations whose ancestry was not simply African or Eurasian, but a unique blend forged through shared landscapes. The deeper scientists looked into the genomes of modern populations, the more these patterns came into focus. In some groups, Denisovan ancestry remains dispersed across many genes, indicating repeated interbreeding over long periods. In others, Denisovan contributions appear in concentrated blocks, representing isolated episodes of contact. Both patterns attest to a dynamic world where human groups moved, interacted, and adapted in ways that defy simplistic evolutionary models. The ancient world was more fluid, more interconnected, and more diverse than earlier scholarship allowed. But the Denisovan story also reveals something humbling about the fragility of the archaeological record. Their near-total absence from physical sites shows how easily entire lineages can vanish from view. Climate, geology, erosion, and chance determine what survives. That Denisovans remained unknown until the 21st century, despite their enormous genetic impact, demonstrates how much of human history still lies undiscovered. It invites caution, urging researchers to approach the past with humility, knowing that vast stories may remain hidden just beyond the reach of current methods. Technological advances promise to bridge some of these gaps. Improvements in ancient DNA extraction, sediment genome analysis, and protein sequencing allow scientists to infer the presence of hominins even when bones are missing. These tools may eventually reveal additional Denisovan populations or identify fossils long mislabeled due to our limited understanding of ancient diversity. Already,
Hints of unknown human lineages appear in the genomes of modern populations, suggesting that we have only begun to map the full spectrum of ancient humanity. Beyond the scientific implications, the Denisovan discovery reshapes how we understand ourselves. It challenges the notion of a singular origin story and replaces it with a shared ancestry, an intertwined evolution shaped by collaboration as much as competition. Homo sapiens did not simply inherit the Earth. We inherited the strengths, adaptations, and resilience of the humans who came before us. The Denisovan contribution is a reminder that our species' success was not inevitable. It was built on countless moments of contact, some cooperative, some intimate, some born from necessity, that collectively shaped the future of humanity. This insight carries a powerful weight. It suggests that diversity, connection, and interdependence are not modern ideas but ancient truths embedded deep within our shared past. The Denisovans may no longer walk the earth, but their legacy forms part of the foundation upon which human survival rests, a reminder that evolution is less a story of dominance than of coexistence. And as researchers continue to trace the threads of our intertwined histories, the deeper message becomes clear. The human story is far richer, far older, and far more interconnected than we ever imagined. As the Denisovan story approached its modern form, one final layer of understanding emerged, a realization that human evolution is not only a biological process or an archaeological puzzle, but a record of relationships. Every piece of Denisovan DNA preserved in living humans tells a story of proximity. Groups who camped near the same rivers, following the same herds, sought shelter in the same caves, or navigated the same forests. Their worlds overlapped not because of chance, but because ancient humans shared the same challenges and responded to the same landscapes, sometimes apart, sometimes together. From this perspective, the disappearance of Denisovans gains a different meaning. Their extinction, as traditionally understood, may not have been a single event or a dramatic collapse. Instead, it may have been gradual absorption, small populations merging into larger waves of Homo sapiens until their physical identity blurred, even as their genetic legacy endured. This pattern is common across human history. Groups blend, cultures intertwine, and identities shift over time. The same processes that shaped ancient populations continue to shape societies today. Denisovans, in this sense, never truly vanished. They simply became part of us. This reframing also affects how scientists view ancient encounters. Rather than imagining conflict as the default, researchers increasingly consider cooperation, coexistence, and opportunistic alliances. Genetic exchange between populations requires not only physical proximity, but also tolerance and familiarity. The Denisovan genome carries the imprint of thousands of such encounters. Some were likely brief. Others may have involved stable communities where individuals from different groups lived side by side. These silent interactions left no artifacts, but their consequence is written into modern DNA with remarkable clarity. As paleoanthropologists integrate genetic data with archaeological and environmental records, a more nuanced image of the Pleistocene emerges. The ancient world was not populated by isolated species living in neat geographic boundaries. It was a place of overlapping territories, shifting climates, and mobile bands adapting to landscapes in constant transition. Rivers dried, floods carved new valleys, forests expanded and retreated, and coastlines rose and fell. In these dynamic conditions, humans, Denisovans, Neanderthals, early Homo sapiens, responded not as solitary species but as interconnected populations inhabiting the same ecological web. This broader framework also underscores the fragility of the physical record. The absence of Denisovan settlements, tools, or symbolic objects does not indicate cultural emptiness. It reflects the selective nature of preservation. Wood, fiber, hide, bone. All materials that could have been central to Denisovan life rarely survived the forces of time. Even stone tools, once exposed to landslides, flooding, or erosion, scatter beyond recognition. Geological processes erase more evidence than they preserve, leaving behind uneven glimpses of a world that was once full. Yet the Denisovan story endures precisely because their most important legacy was not material. It was biological. Their genes shaped the survival strategies of countless generations that followed. The ability to thrive at extreme altitude, resist local pathogens, metabolize certain foods efficiently, or withstand harsh winter climates, these traits are living remnants of Denisovan innovation. They are not relics of the past, but active components of human life today. Through them, Denisovans continue to participate in the ongoing story of our species. This impact extends beyond biology. It reshapes how we think about identity, belonging, and ancestry. Modern humans often imagine themselves as the product of a single lineage, but the truth is more intricate. We are the descendants of many human kinds, some known, others still hidden, and our success arises from a mosaic of inherited strengths. Denisovans remind us that the boundary between us and them is far more permeable than once believed. The ancient world was full of people whose stories intersected with ours in ways both visible and invisible. Their discovery also pushes questions forward rather than answering them. If one fingerbone and a tooth were enough to reveal an entire lost lineage, how many more remain undiscovered? How many caves hold fragments of genomes waiting to be sequenced? How many forgotten populations contributed to our ancestry without leaving a single fossil behind? The Denisovan case suggests that the unseen chapters of human evolution may be far more extensive than the ones already known. It urges humility, a recognition that the history of our species is still unfolding, not in the distant past, but in ongoing discoveries that reshape what we thought we understood. As the field advances, researchers will continue to refine the Denisovan story. New technologies will reveal hidden genetic signals, identify unknown ancestors, and perhaps uncover the first complete Denisovan skeleton. But even if such a skeleton never emerges, the Denisovans have already altered our understanding of humanity. They taught us that the past is not a straight line, but a web of connections. They showed us that evolutionary success is not solitary, but shared. They expanded the boundaries of who we consider human, forcing us to look beyond appearance and focus on the deeper threads that link us across time. And perhaps that is their greatest legacy, a reminder that we carry within us traces of worlds older than memory, shaped by people whose names are lost, whose faces remain unknown, but whose presence still echoes, quietly, insistently, through every breath we take in the landscapes they once called home.